Well, I have some happy news, very good news. I guess that somebody in the U.S. Senate decided to finally take an America First approach to foreign policy, and he's, trying to pass a bill that will get all U.S. troops out of Saudi Arabia within 30 days. Now, doesn't that sound great? No more, defending that horrible, authoritarian monarchy in their various wars that they start in the Middle East in places like Yemen. No more inciting terrorist attacks, like 9/11, because if folks don't remember, they folks at Al Qaeda actually put out, a list of grievances with the United States of why they committed, the attacks on 9/11, and their biggest one was, hey, U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia, which is where most of them were from. Believe it or not, none of them really were from Iraq or Afghanistan. They were from the Arabian Peninsula, and they had a big problem with the U.S. being there, and so do lots of other people, because of course that's where the Islamic Holy Land and things like that are, and so there's just all sorts of trouble that gets started by having a presence there, and so Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana said, "Yep, that's it. Pass my bill, and we will be out of Saudi Arabia in 30 days." Unless the Saudis raise the price of oil. So yes, there's actually a condition here. He doesn't seem to actually want U.S. troops to leave Saudi Arabia. He's threatening to remove them. The goal of his bill, rather, is not to remove troops from Saudi Arabia, but to get troops, or to get Saudi Arabia to do what he wants. And he's just using he's just dangling this as a threat. And he's not even threatening them to do anything good. He's threatening them to try and get them to do something terrible, which is raise the price of oil. Now, the reason for this is because Bill Cassidy is from Louisiana, and I guess, Louisiana, like a lot of the Gulf states, has offshore oil drilling, and right now, North American oil producers are getting absolutely creamed by Saudi Arabia and Russia in their price war, which is still sort of ongoing, even though President Trump announced that there was a deal and that the Saudis and the Russians had worked out their differences. And they are cutting, production of oil, but they are not doing it significantly to the point to where it would make oil production in North America profitable, because oil production in North America is generally very expensive compared to the Middle East. And so these American oil companies, or at least oil companies that are working in America, are not doing well. That was one of the catalysts of this current, bear market in the stock market, was that all the oil producers were going under, and their bonds were going to turn bad. And they were not going to be able to continue to exist. They might, God forbid, have to file for bankruptcy because they had an unsustainable business model. And so Bill Cassidy's goal here is to try and blackmail the Saudis into raising the price of oil even further than they already are, in a blatant attempt to, just act in the interest of his big oil buddies. And so, this is a different kind, this is different from the usual, war for oil narrative that you might hear some people talk about, to where they justify the wars in the Middle East and say, oh, the U.S. just wants the, oil, free flow of oil from the Middle East. Well, now it's actually quite the opposite. Bill Cassidy here thinks there's way too much oil flowing from the Middle East, and he wants to cut off that supply. And he's saying, hey, Saudi Arabia, you like having U.S. troops protect your reactionary monarchy? Well, then you're going to have to play ball. And so in this case, you can think of you can still think of the troops in Saudi Arabia, as being there on the part of oil producers, but just not really in the Saudis in this case. By using the threat of removing the troops to get the Saudis to produce less oil, the troops over there are essentially serving the interests of domestic oil producers. And to an extent, of course, they did that too in Iraq, because in Iraq they fought to, take away all the oil from Saddam Hussein, and then, ExxonMobil and other companies were able to come in and start, drilling that oil. But again, the troops in Saudi Arabia in this equation are not there to get more oil for U.S. companies. They're there, like I said, to get less oil, so that the American oil companies can just dig the oil out of the ground here. It really is just sort of the same old story, just a different spin on it. The U.S. military is being used as pawns in the oil trade. And, when I see stuff like this, when I see that, if Bill Cassidy thinks that, we can just remove the troops willy-nilly within 30 days because, over something completely unrelated to national security, which is raising the price of oil, if anything. If you want to connect oil to national security, it would be about preventing the price of oil from going up to make sure that, people in America can afford to, power the economy. But anyway, if he's able to threaten to remove troops so willy-nilly, then they clearly aren't, doing much of value for us there. If it clearly is only in the interest of the Saudis to have U.S. troops stationed there, then why the hell would anyone sign up to serve in this military to begin with? You really want your life to be a bargaining chip? I really wonder what the brain-dead support our troops crowd thinks of this. The folks who, never question anything, any decision that is made regarding the use of American military power, for the sake of not wanting to insult our troops. Personally, I think they'd be too dense to really understand the nuance of what's going on here. I feel like they'd be just as happy, pulling the troops out for the sake of the oil companies, as they would be to send the troops in. I think that it's whatever people are riled up into a frenzy over, becomes the new justification. Nobody thinks critically about what the military does, or what is done with the military in this case, at the hands of civilian politicians. It's also tiresome at this point. I mean, that's really why I have no hope that anything regarding American foreign policy is going to change until it's forced to change. Just like the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union ran pretty much full bore on their, world domination strategy, same as the U.S., until they completely, collapsed and, went through a national bankruptcy. So who knows how close at hand that is for the United States? I mean, it could be right around the corner with everything that's been going on. I've certainly, been a chronicler of our financial devastation here. But even I'm not sure that this will be the final nail in the coffin. I'm referring, of course, to the Wu flu and the financial crisis that it has sparked. I only think that that America's military adventures around the world to various hellholes like Saudi Arabia or Yemen or Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere else that the U.S. has bases around the world that are constantly being supplied and reinforced with more troops and things and ongoing training missions. I think that it won't be because there is any choice or change within our government or within our populace that demands that those people come home and stop wasting time and resources over there. The only thing that will get them back here is when the resources run out for good, to when it is no longer possible for that presence to be maintained. So even if Bill Cassidy was genuine in what he was doing here, even if he really did want to have have U.S. troops out of Saudi Arabia within 30 days, it wouldn't matter because it would be stopped somewhere along the way. Obviously, I mean, it wouldn't get through the Senate, and if it did somehow get through the Senate, it'd be stopped in the House. And, if it somehow managed to get through both houses of Congress, well, then even someone like Donald Trump, I'm sure, would veto it because there's enough folks who know how this game is played. American government policy is the product of long-entrenched interests. And each of these very different interest groups all support one another. They support a lack of change in the system. The checks and balances in our government are not on, the excess of power. It's not on stopping the executive branch from seizing too much power from, the legislative branch or something like that. The checks and balances in our government ensure that, business as usual continues on in perpetuity. The checks and balances ensure that the American government, as it has existed since the end of World War II, continues for as long as possible. This is the real deep state phenomenon that, some people allude to. It's both nonpartisan and amorphous. It's both public and private, meaning it exists within government and outside of government. It even goes well beyond the military-industrial complex. That is really just a subset of the whole ruling complex, which, itself predates all the members of the ruling class who are alive today. It really is would be a tremendous study in spontaneous order. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.